Hi, it's Christina here for another episode of Ask Fit and Bendy today. Sorry I'm starting a few minutes late, more technical difficulties with the microphone, but seem to have got it up and running and hopefully you guys can hear me. We have a ton of questions today. So what I've tried to do is organize them into sections, and I'm going to get through as many of them as I can. At some point I am going to have to run out because I have to teach. Betty Boop is here to help out in case I can't answer something. Usually she'll have the answer. So let's get started. We're going to start with Katerina. And Katerina had some questions about the Get Bent DVD and some of the stretches in the DVD. First question, in the warm-up, when the hips are going side to side, so you're doing the shift of the hips side to side, are the legs locked? No, the legs are going to be slightly bent for that. So you want a soft knee. And during moose stretch, are the legs locked? So moose stretch is the one against the wall where you're arching the back. And the answer, again, is no. You want the legs straight but not locked. In general, it's rare when you're standing that you want to lock into the knees. You can straighten the knees, but you don't want to lock them out so that you don't want to just sit into the joint. You always want to have engagement through the knee when you're standing. But yes, the knees are straight in moose. They're just not locked. And number 3, in your splits, should you be focused on stretching the hip or the hamstring? And apparently Katerina had a bit of a pulled hamstring, so she's a little nervous about focusing too much on the hamstring. So the answer is both. You really want to target both, and depending on which area of your body is tighter, you'll feel it more in one or the other. But it's usually easier to feel this in the hamstring, especially if you have a hard time squaring your hips. The thing is that you want to try and get a nice even stretch through both of them. If you have a problem with your hamstrings, and I'm about to go into hamstrings, this is a segue into a couple of questions about hamstrings. If you have some issues with pulled hamstrings in the past, it's important to do hamstring strengthening as well, and to not push too hard. You never, in splits, you never want to push super, super hard. Sometimes, especially if you're kind of close or if you're frustrated, you kind of push into it really hard, try to get your butt close to the floor. The muscles tend to get cranky with that. They don't like it so much. So try not to push super hard into either the hip or the hamstring. But sometimes you have to shift the hip position a little bit. Like sometimes you'll feel it more in the hamstring, sometimes you'll feel it more in the hip, but you really want to get both. And if you find that one is really dominating and you're overdoing the hamstring or something, stretch the hamstring separately and get the hamstring nice and warmed up before you go into the splits. You can try to feel both. All right, so moving into our hamstring section, like I said, I organized this as best as I could. For Faye Larkins, Faye's knees, she's having difficulty getting the knees to fully extend. And the doctor said that the only way to get that to happen would be an operation. Is that true? Without knowing more about your knees, it's really hard for me to say, like, why did the doctor say that you need an operation, if there's something else going on with your knee. But for most people, that's just because there's a lot of tightness in the back of the knee, and doing exercises to strengthen the muscles that straighten the knee can slowly start to open that up. And you can do that just if you're lying on your back and you extend your leg up in the air and you squeeze that knee muscle straight, and then let it bend, and then squeeze it straight, and bend. And if you do like 40 or 50 of those, you're definitely going to feel that muscle in your knee. And if there's nothing structural with the knee that's preventing it from straightening, if it's just tightness in the joint, then you will start to notice some improvement. At the very least, your knees will get stronger and more stable. Do you need surgery to get your knees be a little straighter? That seems like kind of an intense thing to do, just to straighten your knees, to go and have knee surgery. So unless there's something really deeply structurally going on with your knee, I would say just do some knee straightening exercises like that, and work on the stabilization of the knee and worry a little bit less about the perfect line. Everybody's built differently. For Kieran, hamstrings in splits. The hamstrings feel like they're sticking together. It's fine when you're doing regular hamstring stretches, but as soon as you get into the splits, she's feeling like the hamstrings are twisted together somewhere in the mid back of the thigh. So they can't be twisted together. That's not possible. But what could have happened is, especially if you had a tear in that hamstring in the past, there could be some scarring or some adhesions. Adhesions are when this gluey stuff kind of glues the muscles together and they stick. And you might be feeling it more in splits because maybe the hip is pulling off to the side or is pulling in a way that's kind of really specifically targeting that area that's stuck together. So if that's what's going on, then sometimes acupuncture or rolfing are good ways to get into scar tissue. So with acupuncture, it'd be through getting the muscles to relax a little bit more. Rolfing, they can actually get in there and sort of manipulate the fascia, the sticky stuff, the gooey stuff that's gluing it all together, and start to get it to unglue a little bit. And so I would recommend trying that. I wasn't sure if you're feeling it on both sides or just one side. If it's one side, that makes it even more likely that it's some kind of scar tissue in there, unless you tore both of them in the same place, which could happen too. So that would be my guess, is that it's some kind of scar tissue or adhesion, and some kind of fascial manipulation ought to help that a lot. Keep me posted. For Zuri Bella, we miss you in class. Zuri, come back and see us. It sounds like you haven't been there because you had a pulled hamstring. So yes, recovering from pulled hamstrings. It's been a little over 6 months, starting to get back into stretching. Definitely want to start stretching at this point, but you want to focus a lot on active flexibility rather than passive. So when you're starting to get back, of course, you've been resting it for a long time and you want to just jump back into it and really try to get it to go as deep as possible. But you've got to go very slow and easy with it. And I think I've probably said this in past Q&As that you want to treat your hamstring like someone that you really hurt their feelings, and you have to regain their trust. So you hurt your hamstring, you need to regain its trust, and you have to do that slowly. You can't do it quickly. So that same knee straightening exercise that's good for the back of the knees, that can also be good for the hamstring. Also one where you lay on your back and pull the knee into the chest, and you hold the thigh right here on the chest, and just work on gently straightening and bending the leg every time, trying to go a little further. Don't let the thigh come away from the body. You're trying to keep it in. And this is going to get the bottom part of the hamstring. So the knee straightening exercise up here gets more the top. You want to also be able to get the whole hamstring. So you'll really feel that in the bottom. Feel the muscle in the kneecap working. And focus more on those types of exercises than on, sitting in your splits or doing, a lot of like deep passive stretching where you're using gravity to push into the muscle. Give that some time. Make sure that the muscle is really feeling stronger and healthier. Hamstring strengthening is also really important for that. So, bending the knee in towards your butt. You can put a little ball in between your heel and your butt if you're on hands and knees, and squeeze into that and do leg lifts, back leg lifts, stuff to strengthen the hamstring. And strengthening it will also help speed the healing and get blood flow to that area. Transitioning into splits questions for RuPaul. Hi, RuPaul. Things are looking good. Love your photos. Ru has been working hard on squaring and is finding that she's shaking a lot in her splits. Don't worry about it. I know it's annoying, but it will go away. It will go away the more that you do it. Shaking in stretching, just like when you're trying to do a pull-up or trying to do your 25th push-up and you're like, ugh, and your arms are shaking. It's just your muscles getting used to something new. And it happens when we push our bodies a little bit past our comfort zone. So, you want to pay attention to it as, hey, I'm going into some place where my muscles aren't super comfortable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong. And don't worry, don't worry about it, really. Just breathe through it. And as your muscles get stronger and they get more used to the position, the shaking will lessen. The more you do it, the more you train it, the easier it's going to get. Other part of the question, why is it so much harder to straighten the front leg in square splits than in turned out splits? That is not an uncommon problem. And the reason is because, so we have 3 hamstring muscles that run up the back of the leg. And the outer hamstring muscle, the one that runs on the outside of the hip, is usually the strongest and the tightest. So part of why it's hard to square your hips is because that tight muscle tends to pull that front hip forward. If this is your front leg and this is your back leg, that tight hamstring wants to pull that hip forward. And when you pull the hip back, you're definitely going to start to feel it more in the outer hamstring. For most of us humans, that's going to be the case. That outer hamstring is tighter. So you've already got that pressure on the hamstring, and then you're also trying to straighten the knee, which is putting even more pressure on the hamstring. So that's why oftentimes when you square the splits, that's when you're going to feel the knee wanting to bend. It's like the muscle's just looking for a little bit of give. So a way to work on that is to stretch your hamstring with your hips in square and the leg just slightly across the body. So instead of coming straight out of your body, it's going to go a little bit across the body. So this is my left leg that I'm stretching. Instead of stretching it here, I'm just going to stretch it a little bit here and then pull that hip back to square and work on straightening the leg. And that's going to target that outer muscle, which, like I said, is the hamstring that's usually the most problematic for us, which is why if you're doing the Bendy Body DVD, the stretches that go across the body to the opposite ear, those hamstring stretches are usually the ones that make people go, and yeah, make funny faces and noises. So, so try that and see if that helps. Okay, so we have 3 questions from people that are almost the same about the knee of the back leg hurting when trying to square splits and lunges. And that's from Christina Flores, from Bettina Postma, and from Venyan. So I'm going to address all 3 of those questions together because you guys are all having pretty much the same problem. And it's, again, this is a problem that happens a lot of times because if you have tight hips, that hip joint can get really locked in, and then the knee joint tends to be kind of unstable. So if the hip joint is really, really locked in place and the knee joint is less locked in place and more wobbly, sometimes when you're trying to stretch the hip, you end up feeling it in the knee instead. And that's something that you really want to look out for. You don't want to, obviously, you don't want to injure your knees. So one thing to look out for is just don't go quite so deep into the stretch when you're squaring it at first. Really lift your hips up and square them without a whole lot of stretch on the hip, and then try to sink into it from that squared position and feel the stretch that way. And that's going to be a little bit easier than really going deep and then trying to square it where you're trying to push into that hip and you might feel some torque in the knee. I think Betty, you sent me some photos. Actually, a couple of you guys sent me photos, and it does look like there might be just a little bit of rotation in the leg. So when that back leg is going back, you want to make sure that the heel of the back leg, I'm going to push this down a little bit, the heel of the back leg isn't turning in or out, and that the knee is facing straight down to the floor. So if you do it in front of a mirror, it's very easy to kind of let that heel go one direction or another, especially when you're trying to square the hip. Sometimes that heel really comes out like it's going to help you push this hip forward. But really what it's doing is just creating some torque in the knee there. And so really work on keeping that foot and that knee, everything coming straight down, that nice straight line. And then the last thing is if the pressure on the kneecap is part of the problem, so as I go into the lunge or the split, if that back knee on the floor is part of what's making it hurt, you can grab one of these handy dandy foam rollers and put it against your thigh like this in your lunge. So it's above the knee. The kneecap is here. The foam roller goes against your thigh up here. You can bend the knee or straighten it. You can sink it down. You can do this in a lunge. You can do it in a split. I don't have enough room here, but I could straighten this front leg into a split. And that will take all the pressure off of the kneecap if part of what's going on is a sort of pressure into the floor from the knee. So work on those things, but the main thing is that if you're having knee pressure, look at the hip. Look at the alignment. Make sure that the hip is going straight. Don't push too deep in the hip, but usually the culprit is a tightness in the hip so that the knee ends up twisting to make up for the fact that the hip isn't. So just go a little easier on it. You can also do those same knee straightening exercises that we talked about earlier, bend and straighten the knee, and that will definitely help you increasingly stabilize the knee, because the stronger the knee is, the less likely it is to twist instead of the hip. All right, I hope that helps you guys. Let me know. And one more splits question here for Emma Danby Coldray. I have found out that I have hyperextended joints. I'm now worried about injuring myself. So when you're hyperextended or hypermobile, then you always have to approach stretching from the perspective of needing to be stable. There appears to be music coming out of my computer here, and I'm not sure why. I have no idea where it's coming from. Let's just ignore it, shall we? So you really want to make sure that you do a lot of exercises to keep your joints in place. So what I would recommend, because I'm pretty hypermobile, a lot of my joints as well, and the thing that's really helped me is doing Pilates. So in addition to doing your stretching, do Pilates. Be able to feel where those muscles are that hold your joints in place and keep them from going to that overextended position, so that you know where to stop and don't go past what your body is able to hold. And that's particularly true for over splits, especially in the knees, because knees, well, if you have hyperextended knees, and especially if you're doing middle over splits, that can be very hard on your knees. So focus on a lot of strengthening and less focus on the passive stretching. So you can do some splits, but don't make that the main focus of your training. Make it a lot of stuff where you're holding your legs, so you're holding position, standing splits, or lying down splits where you're able to lift and hold your leg in place. And definitely try to supplement it with strength training, some kind of stabilization. It's not necessarily a bad thing being hypermobile. It's just something else, you know, that you want to keep in mind, that your body has its own special quirkiness. For Danielle and okay, a hernia. Yes, Danielle has developed a hernia in her lower abdominal area, lower belly above pubic bone. So I do know a number of circus folk who have abdominal hernias. And actually, to answer your question, I asked them about whether or not their hernias affect their ability to do backbending. And they said they can still do it. They just have to, you know, be aware of what's going on with the hernia and sometimes poke it back in through the muscle. I know that surgery is supposed to be the only way to fix that. I do have a friend who had the surgery and it didn't work. So I think that the surgery isn't 100% guaranteed to help. Doing lots of abdominal strengthening, I think, can help a little bit. But just, you know, I don't think you necessarily need to stop doing back bends unless your doctor says don't do any back bends. Because I don't know how bad your hernia is or anything, but I do know people who do back bending with a hernia. So listen to the doctor's advice, but also, you know your own body pretty well, and you can try and see what it feels, especially if the hernia is still very small. You want to keep it small, of course. Yay, abdominal strengthening. All right. Yes, Danielle, Pilates can be very helpful. I always recommend Pilates. Everyone out there should do Pilates. It just saved my life, especially if you're doing flexibility training. You really want to learn to have that stability and control the muscles in the pelvic floor, the stability in all the joints if you're going for that increased range of motion. For Grace, targeting upper back and back bends. Easier to feel the lower back, easier to feel the shoulders, hard to feel the upper back. Yes, you're right, it is harder to feel the upper back. The thing about the upper back is that it doesn't, for most of us, naturally want to bend backwards. You have to make it bend backwards, and that means targeting those muscles right underneath the shoulder blades. So these muscles through here, and what those muscles are going to do is they're going to slide your shoulders down, get your upper traps nice and long, and then you want to think about using those muscles to lift the sternum up towards the ceiling. So in order to avoid just using your shoulders instead of your back, I would say just keep the arms down and work on trying to feel those muscles lifting the chest. You can also do that in your cobra if you are lying down. You can do lying down with my bottle cap. So normally when we push up into cobra, right, it's really easy to go right to the lower back. Instead, walk the arms out long in front of you. Work on that feeling of sliding the shoulder blades down the back, trying to keep the ribs down, slight tuck in the pelvis so you know that the lower back isn't working at all. And see if you can just find those muscles in your upper back. it's a lot of contraction in the muscles. So you're not just kind of pushing up into it and hoping it bends. It's sliding the shoulder blades down, opening up the chest, and squeezing, squeezing, squeezing those muscles in the upper back to try to get it to bend. And finding those muscles is what's really going to make a difference for getting the upper back to open up. The moose stretch is also an upper back stretch. I know if you have flexible shoulders, sometimes it's easy to just feel that in the shoulders. So I would say press the arms into the wall a little bit to engage the shoulders. And again, focus on sliding the shoulder blades down the back, engaging those upper back muscles, and think about lifting and opening the chest using the muscles of the upper back. That can be very helpful. For Tamara, wrist pain in bridge. So she has a ganglion cyst on the wrist, so any kind of pressure on the hand with it flexed back like this is very painful. This is common even for people who don't have wrist cysts. That was fun to say. So it's not the end of the world. You can definitely still do bridges. What you want to do is get a couple of yoga blocks. Here, let me grab a couple. Give me just a moment. And what you're going to do is put them like so. Put down your yoga blocks. And when you push up into your bridge, you're going to put your hands on the yoga blocks like this. And I'm not actually going to do it because I don't really have room on the mat. But if you put your hands here on the blocks, then you're going to have, you're going to be able to have, you can have it so that there's less angle on the wrist. You can sort of put the palm there. If that's still too much bend, then you, lucky you, get to learn to do fingertip bridge. So that would mean that instead of having the hand flat on the floor like this, you would tent the fingers and press up into the bridge like this. You could just do that on the mat. Press up into the bridge with the fingertips down. And that's going to fire all these muscles in the wrist. It's going to make your wrists and your hands super duper strong. If you don't have the strength yet in your hands or your wrists to push up into bridge with that, start just kneeling and holding your body weight on your fingertips, gradually working up to a fingertip plank, and then you can do a fingertip bridge. And it might take a little bit longer to develop the strength to be able to do it, but boy, does it look amazing. And it will give you, you'll be able to like crush beer cans with your hands, if that was something that you really wanted to do. So it'll give you really good, strong wrist and hand strength. But it's still totally, if the rest of the bridge is fine for you, it's still totally possible. You just have to, you know, modify a little bit. All right, now we are moving into our middle splits section. We still have so many questions to go. So many questions in the world. For Nicola, Jane Campbell. Oh, and she's asking this question on behalf of Alicia. What is the best way to open hips to get more perfect middle splits? I currently do frog and butterfly, but my hips still seem to hit a wall where they won't move any further. And there's actually a very similar question from Olga, who had a child 3 years ago and wonders if she'll ever be able to do middle splits. She's wondering if it's structurally even possible for her. So what I would recommend for both of you guys are doing the single leg middle splits to start with. So one leg is in frog and the other leg is extended out straight. It looks like so. I start hands and knees, I extend this leg out long, and I slide down there. So this leg is straight, this leg is bent. And it enables you to really focus on one leg at a time. And that can be very helpful since one of the biggest problems with middle splits is that amount of pressure on those groin muscles makes people panic. Not just you, like almost everybody. Lots of people feel panicky in middle splits. So you want to go into it slowly so that you don't get that like heartbeat, sweating, feel like I'm going to puke and die kind of feeling, and just trying to ease into it so you have a little bit more control when it's only one leg at a time. And when you're in it, try to get some movement in it. So tuck and arch the pelvis, move the hips forward and back, And then really work on feeling and strengthening the external rotators of the leg. So those are the muscles in the outside of the hip here that turn the leg out. So exercises like this, where you're opening the leg and trying to squeeze these muscles in the outside of the hips, can be very helpful. Anything where you're strengthening the outside of the hip. The strength of the outside of the hip will help to open up the inner thigh. Also working on laying on your back with your butt up against the wall, letting the legs fall open, and then trying to squeeze those muscles on the outside of the hip, like you're trying to push your feet down to the floor with the muscles of the hips, can help you feel those muscles. And the stronger they get, the more the inner thighs will open up. It's true there are people whose pelvic structure don't allow them to go past a certain point, but developing that strength in the outside of the hip and that external rotation of the hip will help the inner thighs open up even a little bit more, even if you never get it, completely perfect. You will know if it's your pelvic structure, if it's the bones, because you feel your two bones stuck together, like they're clumping deep inside the hip socket, sort of to the outside and inside the hip socket. So if that's what you're feeling, then it is probably like bone-on-bone restriction. But even if you're feeling that, more external rotation will help you go maybe just a little bit deeper. But keep those muscles in the outside of the hip nice and strong. It will help the inner thighs relax. And one leg at a time is definitely helpful as well. For Lucilila, she had the same question also about middle splits. She also sent a photo, and what I'm seeing from your photo is a little hard to tell exactly what was going on, but it looked like your hands were behind you. I couldn't tell exactly if you were holding on to the backs of your thighs. It looked a little uncomfortable. So try rotating. Make sure that the tops of your thighs and your knees and your shin bones are all facing forward, and your belly should be facing the floor. And just come onto your elbows so that you're facing straight down to the floor, and you can really rest your weight on your elbows instead of having your hands back behind you. And I think that will help. And again, just work on that movement in the pelvis, feeling the external rotation. A lot of times we're told to relax in stretches, which works great if your muscles will relax. But with certain stretches, and I think middle splits are definitely one of them, you can sit in them, and it just feels like your muscles don't relax. They just won't, they just grip, no, relax, because they're scared. So the more that you can contract the opposite muscles, it makes them feel safer. It makes them feel like, okay, well, someone is holding the body up, so now I can relax a little bit. It affects your nervous system too. And that little bit of movement affects the nervous system, just so that gripping feeling gets a little bit less over time. Hopefully that helps. All right. Johanna Kivalo has 3 questions, all about external rotation. So 2 of them are about pancake stretch. So pancake is where it's your straddle. It's where you're sitting on the floor, and you're like this. And so her first one is going sideways. She just wants to know if she's doing it right. And it looks like you're doing it great. It looks beautiful. So she's going over to the side here, and her shoulder's in front of her leg. It looks like you're making really good progress. My one bit of advice would be, really make sure that the opposite leg is lengthening away from you, and that you want to make sure the outside of the leg stays on the floor. So don't let that leg turn in like this. You want to keep pushing it out even as you lean away from it. And the answer is yes, you are supposed to be feeling your core muscles as you stretch sideways. That's good. That's good. You're using your muscles. It's good. You like muscles. And also for pancake stretch, when going forward, you're feeling your pelvic floor lift up off the floor, and the butt lift up off the floor. And is that okay? And the answer to that is not so much. You really want to keep your butt on the floor and the outside of your knees on the floor. And the way that you do that, again, is by squeezing these external rotator muscles and turning the legs back, so that your body's going forward, but your legs are constantly going back. And that's going to keep your butt down. And it's going to also get that separation between the pelvis and the femur. So the femur's going back one way as the pelvis goes forward the other way. And at first you might not come as far down, but the position is you want your knees and your thighs facing up and your butt on the floor. Otherwise, it's not the right position. That's not a straddle. The whole point of straddle is to get the separation between the femur and the hip socket. Otherwise, you're doing a middle split, which is where the pelvis and the thighs both face the floor. So it's a different stretch. And last question for Johanna. There are 2 pigeon variations. Should you do both? So one of them is with the front leg bent in like this, and the other one is with the front leg up here. And they stretch different parts of the hip, and they're both good stretches. So you can go ahead and do both of them. Usually the leg further out at a 90-degree angle is a little harder. It gets more into the outside of the hip and some of those tight muscles. But as long as the hips are square and it's not hurting your knee, those are both good stretches. Okay, we're moving into standing splits. Woohoo! For Jirgana, she's working on getting her standing leg, well, we call it leg scale, but standing side split, where the leg comes up to the side here. And Maria is also working on that lying down. So I'm going to address both of those. So Maria's question is, should the pelvis tilt sideways? In other words, here are your hip bones. Should one hip bone raise up higher than the other? And in order to get the leg behind the shoulder, which is the end goal, to really get that leg up behind the shoulder, behind the head, that hip, for most humans, does have to lift. Occasionally you see those ballet dancers who can get their leg up behind their shoulder and they have both hips square. But for most human beings, that range of motion simply isn't possible because of the way that the hips are built. So for most of us, that hip is going to have to lift up. So it's perfectly valid to stretch the hips in square, and that's a good stretch for the hamstring. But if your goal is to get the leg behind the shoulder, then go ahead and let that hip lift up. That's fine. So you can do it both ways. But if you're holding it in square and your leg only gets so far, then it won't go any further, and you want to get it further, lift the hip. In contortion, that's allowed. In ballet, it isn't. In contortion, it is. Contortion. Easier than ballet. Different. And for Jirgana, what I would really need in order to give you some better advice is a photo of you doing it to see what's going on with your body. She's saying that she's been trying it for a while and it's just not getting better. The leg isn't getting higher. She can get her knee up, but then she can't get the leg straight. So it could be a hamstring flexibility issue. Usually straightening the knee has something to do with the hamstring. But my guess, just off the top of my head, is that you're piking your butt a little bit. You're letting your butt stick out because of tightness in the standing leg. Almost always problems with standing splits are coming from the position of the standing leg and standing hip. Because we're focused so much on the glory of getting that leg up high that you just forget about the standing leg and you just crank that leg up. But if the standing leg is wonky, if the hips are piked, if the hip is tight, if the knee is bent, if you're not stable, it makes it a lot more difficult for this leg to relax enough to get up to the position. And that can even be true if you're lying down. If your hips are wonky or twisted in some funny way, that could be blocking that leg from being able to extend. So please send me some photos, and then I think I'll be able to give you some more specific advice. But my general hunch would be to take a look at what the hip of the standing leg is doing. And now we have 2 questions for Liz Peterson and Kelsey Elsie about needle scale. So how do you develop more active flexibility in the shoulders and upper back and in the hip so that you can reach back and grab that foot for needle scale? So Superman's stretch, where you lie on your belly and lift up like this, will overall develop active flexibility in your back. And working on the Cobra stretch I did earlier to develop the strength in the upper back. These stretches where you pulse your arm straight back and just try to bring it back as far as you can, that will develop the upper back flexibility and the strength. And you really want to focus on feeling that pulse coming from down here rather than from up here. A lot of times when we think about pulling the arm back, we get a lot of overactivation in the front of the deltoids and in the upper traps. And if that's happening, it's going to really restrict your range of motion there. You're only going to be able to get to like here, and it's going to start to bunch up and get in the way. So really work on being able to pull the arm back. Those upper back muscles are really pivotal to get that extension, to be able to reach back and grab. In terms of the muscles to lift the leg, it's hamstrings, it's butt, it's lower back. So any exercise where you're lying on your belly and lifting your legs up and holding them, you can do both legs at the same time. You can do hands and knees, lifting one leg and trying to lift it up. You can do the dynamic kicks. You can also do little pulses up, but you're trying to strengthen, feel the whole hamstring, that little downstairs butt area, as I like to call it, is the area where the hamstring and the butt come together. To a certain extent, the butt muscle itself, as well as the muscles of the lower back, are all what you're going to use for that. You can also go into it with the strap, which is, of course, it's easier, you know, to be able to lift leg, pull on the strap, and then just try to get the leg to a place where you're not at your maximum stretch, but you can feel it, and then just try to lessen your hold on the strap and hold your leg there, even if it's for 3, 2, 1, and then grab it again and lift it and let go. 3, 2, 1, and grab and lift it again. And that will slowly train your body to have the strength in that position, in that very extended position. The other thing is your hips have to be pretty square in that, because if your hips are turned out, then as your foot comes up, it's going to go off to the side. So you've got to keep the hips pretty square. So doing splits in square, and especially over splits or splits with back leg high, are all good preparation for that as well. So yeah, standing eagle scale, being able to just lift up and grab that foot, that's a super fun trick for sure. That's a great one. So it just takes some strengthening of the whole back of the body, really. The whole back. The whole thing can be used for that. All right, we're almost done. Feet. We're on to feet. That's our last section. For Nicole Bergstrom. Nicole has collapsed arches and pronation and internal rotation of the knee. So that basically means that the feet, instead of being even here, are kind of turning in, and the arches are flattening, and then that's pulling the knees in. So that's definitely something worth working on, because that can lead to some long-term problems. And I could give you some exercises, but honestly, I think that you should find someone to work with who can really work with you on this, because it's one of those problems that can get worse if you neglect it, and you want to make sure that you're really doing the exercises right and evening things out. And there are so many exercises that I could give you. I'm not even sure which ones to give you. I haven't even seen a picture of you. So the best thing to do would be to find someone, again, Pilates instructor could be good, or a physical therapist, or someone who can work with you one-on-one, even if it's just a couple sessions, and really look at your feet and what's going on and give you some exercises. But I would definitely recommend that you do that. Don't just leave it, because it won't get better by itself. And you want to be sure that that's taken care of. It's going to affect everything else that you do, including just standing and walking. So good luck with that, Nicole. Let me know how it goes. Gretchen, for Gretchen. Oh, and if you're, I don't know if you're in LA. If you're in LA, I have some recommendations of some fantastic people here. I just don't know where you are. For Gretchen, is it safe to stretch your feet in point? So I know that there are a lot of people who are super crazy about stretching their point. And of course, we all want those toes that go all the way down to the ground, and that beautiful arch in the foot. And the answer is yes. To a certain extent, it is safe to stretch your point. There are those foot stretchers, and you can tuck your foot underneath the couch and have your friends stand on your foot. A couple things to be careful of. One is you want to make sure that the foot isn't sickling, so you don't want it to let it turn in like this. You want to turn it out. I don't have amazing point. I had a lot of ankle problems when I was younger, but I have stretched it, and this has gotten longer. But my foot likes to turn in. It likes to sickle in. So I'm always constantly working on strengthening the outside of the leg here. So when you're pushing on the point, if you notice that it wants to turn in like this, very important not to go so far, but to make sure that that line is really straight. And that's the problem I have sometimes with just pushing your foot underneath the couch or using a foot stretcher. Unless you really have a good line already, sometimes it's hard to tell if your foot is actually in alignment. So the alignment is very important. My favorite point stretch is to come to kneeling like this and just raise the knee up. And you'll really start to feel that on the top of the foot. And then if you slide the foot forward, then you can see the toes curl under, and then you get the top of the toes as well. So with the foot back here, just raising the knee, you're getting the top of the foot. With the foot forward, you're getting the toes as well. And I really like that just because you're only using your own body weight and you have a lot of control over how deep the stretch goes. And you know, it's just like stretching anything else. It's easy to go a little too crazy on it, and some people do. But if you go just nice and easy and just accompany that with some strengthening, releves, ballet releves, going up on the ball of the foot and down, up and down, up and down, making sure again that the alignment is really straight, that can help too, so that you're building the strength along with the flexibility. And the one thing I do not recommend is walking around on the tops of your feet. So curling your toes under and putting the pressure on the wrong side of your toes. That was very in vogue in the circus gym for a little while when I was training. And it's really terrible for your feet. Even if you can do it, you really shouldn't. It can, in the long term, it can really cripple you. So I don't recommend that. More gentle stretches. All right, well, that's all questions for today. For next time, if you have questions, you can post them on Instagram with photos. Photos are super helpful. And hashtag AskFitAndBendy, or you can ask them by posting them to the wall on the Fit and Bendy Facebook page, or you can directly message me through the Fit and Bendy page. So those are the best ways of getting your questions. And I hope that you're doing well and have a wonderful Bendy Wednesday. Bye-bye. Take care.